There are many lessons that distance learning has taught us about the flaws in our traditional education system and how it operates. How might we leverage our current distance learning reality to turn those identified problems into possibilities? I've got 5 ideas that I'm excited to share with you. When the majority of our nation's schools first transitioned to distance learning last spring, it was challenging to say the least. That's mostly because we didn't have an equivalent precedent to turn to, nor did we have enough information to make decisions to support our schools, our leaders, our teachers, and our students effectively. We had to make up a lot as we went. But as schools and districts started to get into the rhythm of remote learning and take some time to think about the possibilities that are afforded to us in a distance and hybrid learning setting, many realizations pointed to the fact that non-traditional ways of teaching and learning could combat some of the constraints that had been raised about traditional educational models. On my watch, those constraints fell into 5 primary categories: time, space, routines, accountability, and relationships. For example, if you think back to pre-March 2020, I bet many of you have heard comments like, "How am I going to get through all of this content in 9 weeks? I just can't conduct these types of learning experiences that I want to provide for my students in my classroom." Or, "I'm sick of doing the same thing every day." Now that we are rewriting the rulebook for what teaching and learning can look like in practice, we have the unique opportunity to turn many of these previously identified constraints into outlets for creativity. Let's take a look at each of them. The first is time. In a traditional high school, for example, many classes are broken down into blocks that are around an hour or just under an hour in length. Maybe it's our new perception of time lately, but if you're like me, you're realizing that an hour is just not enough time for students to engage in truly meaningful learning experiences. In a distance learning context, educators are rethinking what a class period is and restructuring time spent with students to be more meaningful and more impactful. This reckoning with being more intentional about how time is used is opening up a number of ways to reimagine the school day to make it a better experience for teachers and students alike. For example, do we really need to start school so early for all students? Can students have more choice over how they spend their time throughout the day to make it work best for them? How might teachers be granted some more time to plan and participate in professional learning throughout the day? And do we really need a 3-month summer vacation? Next is space. Prior to the global pandemic, many students were confined to the 4 walls of a classroom to conduct their learning, with the occasional opportunity to work in the hallway, or go to the library or makerspace, or maybe even on a field trip or expedition. Now, we have gone from clearly defined physical spaces to no definition of space for learning at all. So the opportunity opens up for how might we leverage the greater community as an extension of the learning environment? What role can parks play in a biology lesson? A grocery store for learning about world cultures? In and around the house for identifying patterns? Granted, at the time of making this video, many public places have occupancy restrictions, but when the pandemic is over, think about ways to leverage the multiple community assets that are available to you to deepen learning for students. Libraries, restaurants, municipal buildings, and small businesses can all play a role in opening students up to brand new possibilities. What if classes were held in a new location every week? For when students are back in a classroom and off of their couch during the school day, what sort of adjustments might we be able to make the classroom environment more comfortable? Do they have to sit at desks all day? What about sitting on the floor, or maybe even lying back in a hammock? Now onto routines. By many accounts, distinguishing one school day from another was a challenging thing to do before the pandemic started, and even today. Perhaps made easier by A and B days, but still very much adherent to a common structure. There's something to be said for a rigid structure to provide students, especially younger ones, some structure to how they learn throughout the day. But how many high schoolers do you know that are really excited to start their first class at 7:30? How many elementary school students do you know who like to sit still for hours on end in front of a computer working? I can't imagine many in either camp. Our transition to distance learning has allowed us to rethink what the school day looks like, mixing up blends of synchronous and asynchronous instruction, shortening instruction time in favor of more collaboration time, and even altering the school week to give teachers and students more time off screen to take care of themselves and their families. On the other hand, we've realized the importance of incorporating new routines into our practice to enhance psychological safety and student well-being. Adding in new routines like movement breaks has become increasingly important as well. To get up, and away from our desks on occasion. These are no doubt routines that I think will continue well into the future. Accountability, or determining what content needs to be covered and how students will be responsible for showcasing their learning, is another area that's ripe for innovation and change. How might we provide opportunities to students to leverage their unique strengths and interests to show what they know? How might the assessment process be a continuation of student learning versus the termination of learning in a subject area? This actually reminds me of a recent conversation I had with a group of teachers from Stanford Public Schools in Connecticut, with whom we're working on transitioning to a competency-based program for their students. Part of a competency-based environment is the use of performance assessments as a way for students to authentically demonstrate mastery over core concepts. Let's listen into a recent conversation I had with that team.
Our task was to fundamentally rethink what the school day can look like for a student and really push the boundaries of what might be possible if we had complete control, if we were the designers of what the school day looked like.
I think we just need to break down the walls and say, okay, let's team up. Let's say social study and science team up for projects, combine classes.
On a Monday, it's learning outside the classroom, wherever that may be, at Stanford Nature Center, aquarium, anywhere.
I think schools should be community centers. They shouldn't just be isolated schools.
Last is relationships. Our relationships with our peers, our staff, and our students look a lot different these days. And as we've all learned, the virtual environment is not the best way to foster deep relationships with those with whom we work. So educators have been extremely creative over the past year, thinking of ways to design meaningful ways to connect with students and for students to connect with each other. In the brick and mortar setting, we relied on random collisions and the lunchroom and after school time to build camaraderie. But now we're relying on virtual water coolers or open virtual meeting rooms where students and staff can come together to talk about school or work or not. I've seen super creative ideas around facilitating virtual team building activities like karaoke, group art projects, and even improv activities. While they're not perfect by any means, the creativity that has come with the constraint of not being able to see our colleagues and students in person on a regular basis has truly unleashed some innovative solutions. Well, that wraps it up for this episode. Now on to my to-do for you. Think about one of the 5 constraints I shared with you and think about where there might be an opportunity to use the lessons learned from distance learning to reinvent the learning experience, both for students and for teachers, regardless of whether they are on or off screen. Also, if you want to think more about designing learning environments to serve all learners but don't know where to start, we're hosting webinars and office hours with our experts at Education Elements, so you can ask questions and learn more. Check out more in the link below to contact us, and be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Thanks so much, and happy designing!